Last month, the movie Don't Look Up premiered in a limited theatrical release and then on Netflix. Co-written and directed by Adam McKay, who also directed Anchorman, Talladega Nights, The Big Short, and Vice, among others, and featuring a cast packed with stars and brilliant character actors led by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, and also featuring Meryl Streep, Jonah Hill, Mark Rylance, and the suddenly ubiquitous Timothée Chalamet. The film is a satirical, dark comedy depicting what happens when a gigantic comet is discovered on a collision course with Earth, and the response from the powers that be is, well, not what we would hope for. This video is not going to be a review of Don't Look Up, but let me just say, briefly, by way of a review, that I liked the movie. I didn't think it was a masterpiece. I had some problems with it. At over 2.25 hours, it's a little long, and it takes aim at so many different targets during the course of those hours that its satire sometimes feels a bit scattershot, and it has exactly one post-credit scene too many. But its cast turns in some very good performances. When its satire does hit the mark, and there are more hits than misses, it's pointed and pertinent, and most importantly, for a comedy, it makes me laugh a lot. Now, not everybody agrees with me. Quite a few movie critics were underwhelmed by Don't Look Up. A few even panned it outright. And this is nothing unusual for me. My tastes are fairly middle of the road, and I normally find myself more or less agreeing with the critical consensus of a given film or TV show or what have you, but occasionally I'll find myself an outlier. I count Superman Returns and Ang Lee's Hulk among the best superhero films ever made, neither of which is an opinion shared by a majority of critics or fans. Most people, at least on the internet, seem to regard Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker as unspeakable cinematic atrocities. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're all that great, but I don't think that either of them is especially awful either. I find the wailing and hissing and gnashing of teeth in response to them to be way over the top. On the other hand, lots of people love the movie Dead Poets Society, and I find it pandering and contrived and inauthentic and generally pretty terrible. Moulin Rouge is also widely beloved, and it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. There's not a single moment of it I enjoy, and just recently most Star Wars fans seem to be really digging The Book of Boba Fett, while I was so bored and irritated by the first episode that I didn't even finish it. My point is, while my opinion doesn't fall outside the mainstream consensus very often, it does happen from time to time. So, if Don't Look Up was just another example of such a case, I wouldn't have felt the need to say anything about it. What I find interesting enough to make a video about are some of the arguments being made for not liking it, and which groups of people are making those arguments. Before I get too much farther into this, I want to make it clear that, so far as I can tell, most people, professional critics, and members of the general audience who didn't like the movie didn't like it for the sorts of reasons people usually cite when they don't like a movie. They found it boring, they didn't think it was funny, they thought the acting was bad, etc. I might disagree with them, but that's to be expected, art being subjective and all. However, there's this subset of people, and this group includes both professional critics and general audience members, whose dislike, and in some cases extreme dislike, of the film is a little surprising. These are people who I would have expected to embrace this movie, or at the very least appreciate its satirical ambitions and overall message, but instead have rejected it, sometimes in pretty harsh and emotionally fraught terms. I'm talking about folks who, like me, are progressive in their political thinking, concerned about the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories in our culture, outraged by the increasingly flagrant willingness of the wealthy to sacrifice the environment, public health, and countless people's lives in pursuit of profit, and frustrated by and anxious about the apathy with which we as a society are responding to any one of several potentially existential threats to our democracy, our general welfare, and even life on this planet as we know it. Why do people whose own views, interests, and goals are similar to those of this film seem to hate it so much? Based on the reviews, reactions, and comments I've seen from critics and the general audience, including some friends and acquaintances of mine, the objections from this segment of the audience fall mostly into three main categories: scientific inaccuracy, hypocrisy, and hopelessness. Let me take those one at a time. I'll start with the objections on the basis of scientific inaccuracy, because I've seen the fewest of those, and they're also the ones I respect the least. It's not that I'm opposed to scientific accuracy in movies. I love science, and when I get to see it depicted realistically in a film or TV show, it's a treat. But if you've watched my Star Trek-related videos, you know that when I'm watching a movie or a TV show, the thing I care about most of all is the story and its ability to involve me, to get me to emotionally invest in what's happening. If I care about the characters and the choices they make and what happens to them, I don't give a shit how scientifically accurate it is. But that's me. Not everybody sees it that way. And for people who are sticklers about scientific inaccuracies, there's plenty in Don't Look Up for them to get stuck on. I should probably mention that I will be discussing certain plot points of Don't Look Up, so if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to know specific details of what happens in it, consider this your spoiler warning. The complaints about the science in the movie that I've seen have mostly centered around three elements: the time it takes for the government to organize a mission to respond to the threat of the killer comet, the details of that response itself, and the result when, seriously, major spoiler coming, this is your last warning, and the result when the mission fails and the comet strikes Earth. When the astronomers, played by Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio, discover the comet and are able to project its course, they find out that there's only about 6 months until it collides with Earth. That's not much time. The movie knows it's not much time. A lot of the humor, especially in the first third or so of the film, is derived from the contrast between the urgency of the scientists and the relative apathy of the politicians. But in reality, even if the necessary government officials were 100% on board with the scientists from the beginning, 6 months is probably not enough time to organize and launch a space mission to intercept and deflect the comet. Such a mission would require designing and building new spacecraft, possibly quite a few of them, and 6 months is just too brief a window for that. The movie fudges this a little by having the first comet intercept mission make use of space shuttles, which the president orders, quote, brought out of mothballs, but that doesn't really make things any more plausible. In reality, the space shuttle fleet has been entirely decommissioned. The 3 surviving fully functional shuttles, Atlantis, Discovery, and Endeavour, plus the test vehicle, Enterprise, have all been retired and placed on display at museums and science centers around the country. Making them space-worthy again would be a lot more complicated than hauling them out and dusting them off. Plus, even if they were able to fly in space again on short notice, the shuttles were only designed to fly in low Earth orbit. By the time the comet got that close, it would be too late to do anything about it anyway. And it's not just the space shuttle that is launched in the movie. There are actually 2 missions mounted to deal with the comet, and both involve the simultaneous launches of dozens of spacecraft atop smaller rockets. This makes for a cool visual, but in reality, you'd never see this many rockets of this size launched this close to each other at the same time. It's just too dangerous, the likelihood of failure far too high. Last year, there was a report that China's space agency is working on a contingency plan that would involve launching nearly 24 rockets to intercept a massive asteroid and deflect it from hitting the Earth, but those rockets would not be launched all at once and would reach the asteroid years before its close approach to Earth, not months or weeks. Finally, there's the result of the comet's impact. When the comet hits Earth, it sets off a global shock wave that appears to flatten cities and kill nearly everyone on the planet in a matter of minutes. While that sort of instant, all-encompassing cataclysm makes for a dramatic and effective climax for the film, that's probably not how it would actually happen. If a comet the size of the one shown in the film were to hit Earth, it would result in a massive fiery air blast and winds stronger than a hurricane, but those effects probably wouldn't travel completely around the world with enough force to reduce buildings to rubble and instantly kill people even thousands of miles away. It would be an extinction-level event, but the extinctions would occur over the ensuing weeks, months, and years, and would mostly be due to the long-lasting environmental damage caused by the impact, not the direct result of the impact itself. This video on Guilherme Caldisti's YouTube channel, linked in the description, presents computer models of the effects of the Chicxulub impact event, which took place around 66 million years ago when an object approximately 6 miles in diameter, roughly the same size as the comet depicted in Don't Look Up, struck Earth near the Yucatan Peninsula. The model estimates that were the Chicxulub event to happen today, around 500 million people would be killed as a direct result of the impact, and cities many hundreds of miles away would be destroyed. That's horrific, but it's far from the pulverizing global shockwave shown in the film. I'm sure those are not the only scientific inaccuracies in the movie, but those are the ones I've seen people mention the most often. And like I said, I don't give a shit. I consider objections like this to be nitpicking and generally don't take them seriously. It's fiction, not a documentary, and the real-world plausibility of the space missions or the aftermath of the comet impact aren't relevant to what the movie is actually about. I have seen a few people make the argument that a film which argues in favor of scientific literacy should have taken more care to get its own science right, and that's better than just fixating on details the movie gets wrong, but it still misses the point. The movie isn't satirizing scientific illiteracy. It's satirizing willful ignorance. People don't ignore the threat of a planet-killing comet because they don't understand the science. They ignore it because they reject the expertise of people who know better than they do. I don't need to have any level of understanding of the orbital mechanics of comets, or spacecraft manufacturing, or rocket launch logistics, or the consequences of impact events to know that if our major scientific institutions identify a problem and tell us we need to do something about it, then we better start doing something about it. The next reason why this particular segment of the audience dislikes Don't Look Up is its perceived hypocrisy. In addition to satirizing the way much of modern culture enables willful ignorance and undermines expertise, the movie also satirizes capitalism, depicting a scenario where powerful people choose to pursue the profit motive even though they know it may lead to the imminent destruction of all life on Earth. Midway through the film, the mission to deflect the comet is aborted shortly after launch when it's discovered that the comet contains vast amounts of extremely rare and valuable minerals. Instead of pushing the comet safely away from Earth, the goal becomes breaking the comet into smaller pieces, which can then impact the planet without causing catastrophic damage and allow their highly coveted resources to be collected and exploited. This new for-profit mission is conceived and conducted by a weirdo tech billionaire who is the film's stand-in for cultishly adored supposed visionaries like Elon Musk, who promise to lead humanity into a bold new era but in practice are more concerned with self-promotion and increasing their own fortunes. But, so the objection goes, who are these wealthy Hollywood types to be arguing against capitalism when they have benefited from that system far more than most? Isn't it a little disingenuous for millionaire filmmakers and movie stars to preach to the rest of us about the evils of capitalism in a film that will add millions of dollars to their own bank accounts and greatly enrich studio executives and investors who are probably even more ethically dubious? Now, I'm sympathetic to this argument. As my friends who are a bit further to the left than I am like to remind me, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. You can be more ethical or less ethical, but there's no way to live and work in this system without getting your hands a little dirty, without contributing something to the hardship of someone somewhere. It sucks. And worst of all, we're kind of stuck with it, for the foreseeable future, at least. Unless you want to completely separate yourself from the institutions and infrastructure of modern life, assuming such a total separation is even possible for those of us who have never known anything else, you're trapped in this shitty system with all its excess and exploitation and cruelty and all the ethical compromises it imposes on everyone. So, does that mean that artists trapped within this inescapable and inescapably unethical system just shouldn't criticize it? If a filmmaker with the clout of, say, Adam McKay has an idea for a movie that ridicules the system and warns of the dire consequences that are waiting for us if certain things don't change, should he just sit on it? Because he has lived and profited under that same system? Philosophically speaking, there's nothing wrong with insisting that people who want to be taken seriously have clean hands, but what good is that philosophy in a world where, practically speaking, no one's hands are clean? Keep in mind, the argument I'm responding to here isn't that the satire is poorly done, or that the film is just preaching to the choir and unlikely to change anyone's opinion, but that the filmmakers have no standing to even attempt to criticize or satirize capitalism because they are active participants in and beneficiaries of that system. I just don't think that's a reasonable or realistic standard. If that was the standard, following it would mean that no one has the right to speak out against the system, especially those with a big enough megaphone to actually be heard. I don't think that's fair to the film, and I don't see how imposing such a standard would do any of us any good. The killer comet crisis depicted in Don't Look Up is a fairly obvious metaphor for climate change. Viewed in the context of the last few years, you can also read it as representative of the COVID-19 pandemic, though that wasn't the original intention. Either way, the point is the same. We face serious, urgent crises. Crises that have the potential to destroy our civilization, or at the very least, damage it irreversibly. Our ability to respond to those crises in meaningful and effective ways is significantly impeded by political leaders and prominent figures in media and industry who have spent countless hours and billions of dollars to convince people that these crises aren't real and that countermeasures are at best a waste of time and at worst threats to liberty and prosperity. That being the case, isn't it better to have movies like Don't Look Up than to not have them? Of course, we can still critique them and point out when they don't work and push their creators to do a better job, but isn't it better to have artists, writers, actors, filmmakers, people with far-reaching platforms using those platforms to try and say something meaningful about all of this, however clumsily, than for them to use those platforms to say nothing of substance? I'm not saying hypocrisy is never a problem, but as a rule, well-meaning hypocrisy bothers me way less than complicit silence. The third reason I've seen folks in this particular segment of the audience give for disliking Don't Look Up, and the last reason I'm going to talk about here, is that the movie is too bleak. It's cynical. It offers no solution to the problem it presents. It's hopeless. I disagree with some of that. I think it does offer a solution to the problem it presents, generally speaking at least, but as for the argument that the movie is bleak, I have to say I agree. And, I might add, so what? Actually, no. Let me correct myself there, because if I say so what, it makes it sound like the bleakness of the movie doesn't make a difference one way or the other. But the bleakness does make a difference. The bleakness is the whole point. Don't Look Up is a satire about the end of the world. If the world doesn't end, that kind of takes the edge off the satire. If the point of your movie is that our willful ignorance and prioritization of profit above all other interests will be our undoing, you've got to show us the undoing, or the point doesn't land. But just because the movie commits to its bleak ending, that doesn't mean it's completely hopeless. The characters in the film don't solve their problem, but there is obviously a solution. They don't realize it in time, or rather, they realize it, but then choose to ignore it and go for the money instead. But maybe we can do better. That's how a cautionary tale works. Ever seen The Twilight Zone? Look, if the movie doesn't work for you, that's fair. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it. But if you hold against the movie the fact that all the characters die and the world is destroyed at the end, you're kind of missing the point. Because being a satire, the movie's not ultimately about what happens to its characters and its fictional world. It's about what happens to us and our real world. The comet on a collision course with Earth in Don't Look Up is a serious, imminent threat, but not an unanswerable one. It demands a rapid and unprecedented response, but a response that the society depicted in the film is capable of providing. If only they would listen to people who know what they're talking about and agree that the number one priority should be preserving the existence of life on Earth, not maximizing profits, they could save their world. But they don't. The looming catastrophe confronting the characters of Don't Look Up can be read as representing multiple things, as I said, but it's primarily a metaphor for climate change. That comet is definitely on its way. Fortunately, like the characters in the film, we have some idea what to do about it, and we have longer than 6 months to do it. We can still avoid catastrophe. That's the hopeful bit. However, in order to avoid it, we do actually have to do something, and not just on the individual level, but all of us, together, our industries, our governments, our societies. We know what needs to be done. But we need to do it. And it's not certain that we will do it. We might fail this challenge. We might lose everything. Not because of some inevitable natural disaster, but because we just can't be bothered to put in the work to solve a problem we created. We might end up destroying ourselves. That is a possible future, perhaps even a probable one. I do think about that, and yeah, it's depressing. Movies like Don't Look Up don't exist to say, it's hopeless, just give up, we're fucked. Even Dr. Strangelove, a much bleaker and funnier and better film than this one, is about more than just gallows humor for its own sake. Great satire, or even pretty good satire like Don't Look Up, is about highlighting the absurdity of the real world so that we can recognize it and do something about it. If we find ourselves inching ever closer to annihilation and we're not doing everything we can to prevent it, that's the ultimate absurdity. And we need to do something about it. Don't Look Up is an imperfect vessel, and its creators are perhaps not the ideal messengers, but ultimately, that message is the most important thing. Art is our culture's way of telling ourselves who we are. For better and for worse, Don't Look Up does that. If we don't like what it's telling us, maybe instead of blaming it or dismissing it, we should start writing a better story. By changing our society for the better. I mean, not by just making up some bullshit we find more palatable. Like, that sort of thing is part of what the movie is making fun of. So, I hope that's understood. Okay, I'm done. Bye.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting this channel with a monthly donation. You can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives, or become a channel member by simply clicking the join button right here on the YouTube page. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.